get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our live podcast recording of Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington, and I'm here with Robert Perry. And today we are talking about gratitude in the Course. Those of us who are here in the United States will be celebrating Thanksgiving on Thursday of this week, and so we are awash in gratitude messaging here, but obviously gratitude is a topic that is very much on the minds of many of us around the world and throughout the year. And so that is the case for reasons that we are going to get into in just a moment. There are 325 references to the word gratitude and thanks in the Course, and Robert has done the very helpful work of compiling them all and pulling out the main themes. And as I said in our workshop on this topic yesterday, the picture that has emerged from this study of gratitude in the Course is so unique and so wise, you can hardly believe it exists. Robert and I have been so moved by what an inclusive and truly loving approach the Course offers in its teachings on gratitude, and also by just how different what the Course teaches is from what we are accustomed to hearing on this topic. Before we get into our discussion, I have three quick pieces of housekeeping to share. The first is that if you would like to join us for live recordings of these podcasts, you can sign up at circleofa.org/events. There is no charge to attend, and you get to hear the conversation unedited and first. So check that out if you're interested. Second,
before all the editing takes place.
I know. We do very little editing of this, as many of you know. Second, if you don't know, we have just printed a soft cover version of the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles. It is lighter, it is less expensive, and it even has a new section in chapter 12. So if you don't have a soft cover yet, you can learn more about that. And the bonus package of gifts that is available with purchase at circleofa.org/softcover. And last but not least, on the announcements, every year here at the Circle, our Course Companions program leads students through the text and the workbook, depending on which volume you are studying. We start at the beginning of each volume in January, and we walk students through the entire text or workbook over the course of the year. And since we are coming upon the end of the year, we'll be starting that again soon. And so if you want to learn more about how to go through the course with us next year, you can learn more by joining our mailing list at circleofa.org/subscribe. Robert, is there anything that you want to say about anything I have just covered or the topic of gratitude in general before we dive in?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
So I think a good place to dive in is you were looking into all the research and attention that's been given to gratitude in the last couple of decades. So I think it'd be a good place to start us off by just telling us, what is gratitude?
Yeah, so just as a baseline definition here, most of what you'll find online defines gratitude as simply as the quality of being thankful. It comes from the Latin word gratus, which means thankful or pleasing. And when you feel gratitude, you're happy with what you've been given and you're not too anxious about having to pay it back. Now, the reason why gratitude has exploded in popularity in recent years, and this is why I also believe that mindfulness has exploded in recent years as well, is that the researchers have discovered that there's a correlation between gratitude and happiness and health. So the theory is that gratitude encourages us to find the goodness in life, and that makes it a positive emotion that crowds out the negative emotion. So the more grateful that we are in our lives, the less stress we have. The less stress we have, the better health we have. The better health we have, the better relationships we have, all of which makes us feel more grateful. And so this traditional gratitude cycle starts again.
And this has led to all kinds of attention on gratitude journals and various gratitude practices, even I think gratitude groups. Do you want to elaborate on any of that?
Yeah, so this is what gratitude also has in common with mindfulness, in that the science is catching up with what we've known about gratitude for many years. So there were three things that I found that I thought was most interesting in the research on gratitude that's come out in the last few decades. One is animals, from fish to bats to gorillas, engage in what's called reciprocal altruism. So, for example, a gorilla will not only groom another gorilla that has groomed it, but it will go so far as to share its food and even to give hugs to other gorillas when it feels like it has been helped by them. So what that says is that there's something very primal about gratitude that's in all of us. Uh, Also, I don't like this language, but by experimentally manipulating people's feelings of gratitude, researchers have been able to kind of force people to become more helpful and generous. And one example of this is a study where participants counted blessings each day in a journal for 2 weeks. And those participants were more likely to offer emotional support to someone else during that time than were the other participants in a control group who were instructed to keep a journal of the hassles in their lives, and particularly comparing their lives to the lives of others. So that's really interesting. And the, the the last bit of research that I found truly fascinating on this topic is that the link between gratitude and what the researchers have called pro-social behavior, it just means getting along, is so clear that what they've called gratitude interventions are recommended in homes and schools and businesses around the world. So these include things like mandatory journaling for school children, for example, gratitude jars where you take slips of paper, you write down what you're grateful for throughout the year, and then at the end of the year, you get to reminisce on all the blessings in your life. And also in offices around the world, they have what's called 3 good things. And so before a meeting starts, you have to list 3 good things that have happened to you that day or that week. And so the positive benefits of gratitude have led us to trying to shoehorn it into our culture, and that's working to some degree. You know, the good news is, as the research suggests, more gratitude means that we are happier. But the downside, and I know you're going to speak to this, Robert, is that while gratitude is touted as a spiritual practice, the way we often practice it keeps us tied to material things.
Yeah, before we get into that, I've been looking online over the last week and seeing that there is a lot of discussion about how to best practice gratitude. I heard a podcast host talking about how he's, in the last few years, he's like filled 11 gratitude journals and it's changed his life. And he did not sound at all like a religious person. And I've seen different sites say, well, every day journaling is best. Some other sites say every week is better. And there's even some research about different outcomes. So it's become quite a major thing out there that in some way you should practice gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's again what I think it has in common with mindfulness too. It's been completely secularized, so it's palatable to a large audience, and the research is there. I mean, the connection between gratitude and happiness is backed by the science. So yeah, it's no surprise that it's so popular.
Yeah, that's one thing I find interesting because, here the course was dictated back in the 60s and 70s, and it is a whole emphasis on gratitude. As we'll see later in our conversation, there are a number of gratitude practices, and it's linked to basically a more positive, joy-inducing worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the course knew about all this ahead of time, way before we discovered it. And yet there are all kinds of ways in which its perspective on gratitude is, way beyond, at least in my perception, way beyond the current focus on gratitude.
Yeah, so the course doesn't stress gratitude in the way that we normally conceive of it. So what are some of the problems that are associated with the way that we conventionally view the topic of gratitude from a course perspective?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me is that there are a few lessons in the workbook that are focused on gratitude. And one of them is lesson 195, Love is the Way I Walk in Gratitude. And it is this searing indictment of much of what we think of as gratitude. I want to go ahead and just read a few lines from the beginning of that lesson, lesson 195, because he says it so well. Gratitude is a lesson hard to learn for those who look upon the world amiss. The most that they can do is see themselves as better off than others, and they try to be content because another seems to suffer more than they. So when you're better, when you're grateful because you're better off than somebody else, then you're essentially grateful because they're suffering more than you. And so a few sentences later, it says, it is insane to offer thanks because of suffering. And what the lesson goes on to essentially say is that is gratitude based on comparison, where I'm grateful because I'm better off than somebody else, is gratitude that stems from a deep-seated competitiveness in which we see others as our rivals. Okay, we're essentially in like a sports competition with them. And just as when you win the game and you defeat your opponents, you are grateful and you thank God. And maybe you think your prayers at the halftime worked, right? And you're grateful essentially because somebody lost. And that's an uncomfortable fact that it's hard to totally get away from in sports. You see various ways in which we sort of look at that and look away. And it's something that I think we are largely successful at getting away from in life. But there is this deep-seated competitiveness in our species, in all living things. And so much of our gratitude is like victory gratitude. It's essentially, I won. We
Yeah.
don't say it that way, but I think beneath a more innocent seeming gratitude, there is that element in a great deal of what we call gratitude.
Yeah, so this is really powerful teaching in the course that you find in that lesson 195. And I hear what you're saying. I think when it comes to our sports teams, for example, we almost like pride ourselves on that competitive nature. You know, the whole goal is to win, right? And if you're on the winning side, then you know you're grateful for that.
Right.
And that's culturally accepted. But there's a more kind of hidden and insidious kind of gratitude that this lesson is pointing out. And it's the idea that the things that we are grateful for in our lives, and we did an experiment in our gratitude workshop yesterday in this, where at the very beginning of the workshop, we asked participants to list 10 things that they're grateful for in their lives. And most of those things have an element of competition in them. And by no means are we excluding ourselves. When I looked at my own list, 9 of the 10 had some element of competition in them. So these are things like, I'm grateful for the purpose that I have in this world, the warm home that I enjoy, the food on the table, etc. But being grateful for those things in some ways means that I have them and others don't. And so that's what the course is referring to as giving thanks because of suffering, someone else's suffering. And we're not in touch with that.
Yeah, I was surprised with my list, and I found the exact same thing. I mean, most of the things on my list were not like, I'm grateful for the bounty on my table. They were more spiritual things, but as I looked in myself, I could feel a certain amount of, and I'm glad I have more of this thing than somebody else. Like
Yeah.
maybe I'm in touch with what the course would call my special function, whereas so many people aren't. And I could be grateful for that function without that, but that element is in there. Like, I'm so glad I've got this when so many don't.
Yeah, and the example that you pointed out was that 1984 song, Do They Know It's Christmas?
You're right.
And we all have sung that song. You can't escape it. But there's a line in it that's particularly problematic, although illustrative in the way the Course speaks of gratitude. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the line is, it says, well, tonight, thank God it's them, meaning the people in Africa suffering, instead of you. And I remember hearing that line thinking, that is terrible. And you can go on the internet and find any number of places where people are saying, that's terrible. In fact, the clamor grew to the point where they re-recorded it a full 30 years later to raise money for the Ebola outbreak several years ago. And they changed the line.
Yeah.
Uh,
And Bono got to redeem himself because he was the one who originally sung that
he
line.
sang it, and apparently he always hated it. He didn't want to sing it, but he wasn't the songwriter.
He subsequently went on to do all kinds of good work in terms of famine relief in the world. So
AIDS and yeah, amazing work.
yeah,
So we
go
shouldn't blame
Bono.
him. So whoever
Yeah.
wrote the song, we'll go after them. But anyway, it's a mindset.
There's probably some Bob Geldof fans out there too who don't.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Anyway, it is a mindset. And so what this lesson is pointing out in really stark terms is that when we're grateful because we've compared ourselves to others and we've seen that in our perception we are better off, that there is an unloving element in that gratitude. And it's hard to deny.
Yeah, and this is where we tend to get some pushback on this idea. So when students hear this, typically the response is, wow, I've never thought of it that way. How interesting. But why can't I be grateful for the things that I have in my life? And so what would you say to a student who may be thinking that now?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's notable that the Course never talks about gratitude in relation to material blessings. And I think the reason is, from its standpoint, that is the most superficial stuff in life. And our gratitude is, if it's going to have a depth to it, a true meaningfulness to the emotion, it has to be rooted in deeper things. And so the Course is always trying to direct our gratitude to deeper things. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say, for instance, if we think some material gift comes into our life, and oftentimes material gifts come into my life, and I feel like, you know what, I can just tell by the way that happened, that was from the Holy Spirit. I'll be grateful. But I try to keep in mind this line from the Course where it says that the Holy Spirit will supply your needs with no emphasis at all upon them. Because he doesn't want to, in supplying them, he doesn't want to reinforce your attachment to them, which keeps you tied to this world and therefore slows your journey to heaven. So I think that we should discount how much gratitude we feel for material gifts. In the end, how much difference do they really make in our lives? Yes, if we're in desperate circumstances, they make a difference, of course. But our gratitude from the Course's standpoint should be aimed at a deeper place. The other thing that I think of in this regard is, if you go on the websites and look at what you're supposed to journal about in your gratitude journal, for instance, they outright say it doesn't matter how small it is, how trivial it is. It's just a cup of coffee. That's fine. And I'm thinking, again, if you're grateful for something that's extremely superficial, for something that is very fleeting and uncertain, then what you're doing is you're trying to anchor your emotional sustenance in, you're trying to send down roots that are going to be very shallow roots, and they're going to be easily torn out by the slightest breeze as the world changes.
Yeah, That's a really important point, because I've been someone who kept gratitude journals in the 90s, and you're right. The emphasis is on anything, no matter how small, works. Just put it in. And I have pages and pages and pages of being thankful for coffee. I mean, it's just kind of a bedrock
Seriously?
of my morning. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
But
that's so sad.
well, it's true. I don't get out of bed in the morning without coffee. Anyway, regardless, your point stands. So where your attention goes, right? So if your attention goes on to the material things like the coffee, and your gratitude flows to those things, then you're going to have a mindset where these things have to be in your life in order for you to be happy. And then what happens when you don't have the coffee in the morning for whatever reason? And then you're all bent out of shape. And so from a course perspective, what we're being asked to do is to put our gratitude into the things that are eternal, the things that we've been given from God. I know we're going to get into this, but
Yeah.
the things that are equal in all. And that's one of the things that I find the most powerful about this idea is you can put your gratitude in the things that you have, but maybe others don't. And that sets you up for comparison-based gratitude, or you can put your gratitude in things that everyone shares equally, so that are much deeply rooted.
Yeah, yeah. All this reminds me, I'm thinking about this classic movie, My Dinner with Andre. And the whole movie is this one long dinner conversation between Wallace Shawn, and his old friend, Andre. They meet up after years, and Andre has gone in the direction of all these deeper concerns. You know, they had this Buddhist monk staying in their home, and he went and stayed at Findhorn in Scotland, and he's had this search for a deeper meaning. And at one point, he's been listening and listening and listening, and he finally just comes out with it and says, look, I'm just grateful if I wake up in the morning and my coffee cup from the previous night is still there and there isn't a roach in it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's thinking, why be grateful for anything? Like, that's it. That's the pinnacle of life. And I think for viewers like you and me, and probably like our audience, we think, that's it. That's all life amounts to. I'm going to be grateful for my cold cup of coffee with no roach in it. Isn't there more than that?
Yeah. Well, I'm a little sensitive to the kind of pushback that we get around this idea. Again, I love the cup of coffee in the morning. So we can express some gratitude for that. It's just not what the course is asking us to do. The course
And
is pointing us to much higher expressions of gratitude, being grateful for much higher things in our life.
yeah, and this is where, I know I've already alluded to this, but this is where the course talks about shallow roots, right? If we're a tree and our roots are like, don't go below 6 inches from the surface,
Right.
then, we're in danger of being blown over. We are not very rooted.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't want our emotional sustenance to be drawn from those kinds of shallow roots. And okay, I can say this as someone who doesn't drink coffee, I don't like coffee, but that seems like as shallow as you can get, right? Don't you want deeper roots?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, do you want to be tied to transient things? Do you want to be tied to the things in your life that can come and go? Or do you want to tie your gratitude to the things in life that will never leave you, and the things
Right.
in which everyone has equally? So,
And the things that aren't so superficial, let's just say it. I know these days, I remember that movie American Beauty, where it was like the beauty of the bag in the breeze. Like, personally, I never liked that, because it's just a bag. I don't know what's happening with my lights here. It's just a bag, right? It
mhm,
doesn't mean anything. Anyway, I
we
probably
should move
should.
on.
We should move
So,
on.
so what is it that the course says? I know
I'll
we've been
stop complaining.
hinting about this all along. Uh, but what is it that the course says we should be grateful for?
Yes, and this is what as you well know, our workshop was all about. And what I've just found so fascinating and profound as I went through all those references to gratitude and thanks, this whole picture emerged. And the picture was one, well, first of all, I realized that Jesus, who I believe is the author, he has this whole picture in his mind. And all these little references, you can't get it from each little reference, but when you add them all up, the picture begins to emerge. And at its most essential, the picture is one in which our gratitude, yes, we are grateful for specific blessings in our lives, especially certain ones. But ultimately, our gratitude is rooted in the nature of reality itself. And that's what so grabbed me. So, we probably should go through, there were these 4 categories that we covered in the workshop, and I guess we should just go ahead and go through them now, unless you want to say anything before I dive into those.
The only thing that I would say to kind of prime anyone who's watching or listening is that when you say that the gratitude the course is asking us to achieve is rooted in a different view of the nature of reality itself, this is a whole different stance to life. And so if we can ground ourselves in this, then again, you're much more deeply rooted and you're not so easily knocked around by external situations that you can't control and feelings that come up at any given moment. Your roots are very deep if you ground them in this view of reality.
And being deep, I think they're also more deeply sustaining. And I think that has to do with meaning. Like for me, I don't care what the cup is of, coffee or alcoholic beverage or anything. None of it means anything, right? And what sustains us emotionally is meaning. So I think that this, by grounding our gratitude in the nature of reality, or at least the nature of reality as the course teaches it, it becomes not only more stable, but it becomes more deeply meaningful. And that is emotionally nourishing for us. Okay, so I came up with these 4 categories, which I'll go through fairly briefly. And the categories were that we should be grateful for God, ourselves, others, our brothers, and our salvation. And each of those categories had a number of subcategories beneath them. Although this was a very condensed view. It could have been much more extensive just because of how many references there are in the course. So the course wants all of our gratitude ultimately to be directed at God, because he is the source of all the other things we're grateful for. We should be grateful to God for creating us and creating everything. If you think about it, if you owe someone your very existence, if they intentionally created you out of love, how could you not be grateful? We should be grateful to God for his love for us, which the course says is total and is beyond our wildest imagination and can never change. And we should be grateful to him for not abandoning us when we abandon him. So he didn't reciprocate.
Yeah, and before you go on to your
Yeah.
next category here, this idea of all of our gratitude being rooted in God, like ultimately being grateful for God and his gifts to us, that requires a particular view of God, a view of God that is not vengeful, a view of God who isn't inflicting suffering on you for a particular reason. Like, I think part of where we go wrong with this idea of gratitude is we've gone wrong with our idea of who God is. So if you have a view of God as unconditionally loving, created you in love, never left you, then it's much easier to get in touch with the gratitude for that figure than it is to some of our contemporary views of who God is and what he does.
Right. And of course, one of the big views that has been around forever is, like you say, that God is vengeful and so on, wrathful. And I think part of the view with that God is we better be thankful to him or else,
Right.
right? He kind of needs our gratitude. If he doesn't get it, we might get the wrathful side of God. And, I think our civilization is slowly, very slowly outgrowing that God. But I think also we have, one of the main conceptions of God these days in spiritual circles is God conceived in some way as impersonal, where we are God. God is not really a conscious agent, a creator, but he's more suchness, some kind of a field or something, or an
Energy of
energy.
love.
Right. And at that point, you know, why would you be grateful to that God? Because he's just this stuff that you are too. And so in the Course, we have a different God than both of those conceptions. We have God as a conscious agent who, yes, is one with us and created us as part of him, but still he's our creator and we aren't him. We're his extension. And in that view, I mean, if you really, really believe that you were created by that God, you couldn't help but be endlessly grateful.
Yeah, and the God of energy, the impersonalization of God, it feels like it's just a running away from that authoritative figure. It's just a way to neuter and defang him into something
I
that we're
think
more
that
comfortable
element's in there.
with.
I
Hmm.
mean, you would, those who teach that view or believe in that view could say, well, I have had direct experience of God, and I can tell you that's what God's like. God is not some conscious being. He is just the void or the emptiness or whatever. And we are God. Um, but I do feel like that element's there, right? Like
Yeah,
it's attractive to us because it feels safer than the wrathful God.
to the point of what you're saying here and this topic, if we really understood the loving, the unconditional loving nature of God, we would be extremely grateful for who he is and what he does.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the lines from the Course is, for what he is, be grateful. And if we really believe that's what he is, we couldn't help it. Okay, so the next category is ourselves. And I don't think we walk around typically feeling grateful for ourselves. Maybe some people do. But in the Course, the fundamental thankfulness there is for the purity and perfection that God created in our true nature. So it's not so much this personality. I think the Course thinks that trying to esteem this earthly personality is pretty much a doomed project because it's not that great. It's just so fallible. But if God created us in our true nature as perfect, as eternal, as pure, as having inestimable value, then we have every reason to be grateful to be that self, right? We all want to be somebody, to have worth, to have, you know, power, um, to have attributes that are lovable. And according to the Course, we have that forever. We just aren't in touch with it. That's a cause for gratitude. And also the fact that God guaranteed that we couldn't ever screw that up. Like we think we screw ourselves up all the time, and that maybe we've spent our lives screwing ourselves up. But from the Course's standpoint, he created us changeless, so we can't screw ourselves up. And then finally, there's a very earthly reason the Course gives for being thankful about ourselves and to ourselves, which is the gifts that we have given others. And the Course says, because giving and receiving are the same, when we give a gift to somebody else, we are the co-recipient of that gift. And as the recipient, we can be grateful for that gift, even when they're not. There's a whole lesson devoted to that concept. It's lesson 197. It can be but my gratitude I earn. And I just think that's a great idea because there are times when we have been lovingly helpful and extending, and the other person didn't really get it and wasn't really grateful or was even resentful. And we can make up for a lot of that on our own because we were the co-recipient of that gift. And so we can be grateful for it.
Yeah, and as we were saying yesterday, we can also give our gift of love freely, because the Course also says that no matter how it is received by the other person, God is grateful to us for giving it, and the Holy Spirit in them has received it and is grateful as well. And so no matter what their body's doing, no matter what their lips are saying, so the Holy Spirit in them, it has received our gift of love and is grateful for it. And that in turn heals us. And so we don't have to withhold or withdraw our love because of how the other person is. We can just
Right.
know that God is grateful, and so are they somewhere.
Yeah. And I think the manual talks about the Holy Spirit receiving the gift, but that lesson acts like it just says there is a part in him that joins with you in thanking you for your gift. It sounds like it's just some deeper element in that person, like their right mind has received your gift. And in that deep part in them, they join with you in thanking you. And I find that really comforting, because not everyone gets the nature of the gifts they've been given. That's just part of life on earth.
Yeah, and again, going back to that just different stance in life, everything about our world will tell you that your behavior depends on what they do and what they say. And if you give them love and they attack you in return, well, then you need to stand up for yourself and completely withdraw or attack back. And
Right.
of course, just gives us this whole different orientation to life where we can love in the face of attack
Right.
and and be grateful.
Yeah, and that's really helped me to think I can be genuinely grateful for the gifts I give because I received those gifts as well. It helps, I like that feeling.
Yeah, and I know we're getting
Yeah,
to,
okay. Okay,
yeah.
we should move on. Okay,
Okay.
so the next category after God and ourselves is others. And this is one of the main points of emphasis in the passages in the Course on Gratitude. Why should we be grateful for others and to others? And the Course extends this to everyone. It says, what's the line here? In 195, we give thanks for every living thing, for otherwise we offer thanks for nothing, and we fail to recognize the gifts of God to us. So he wants us to be thankful for every person and every living thing. And what's the basis of that? There's three things in particular. One, just like with us, we can be thankful for the true nature that God gave them. And the Course talks about this repeatedly. There's a great prayer it gives us to say, which is, I thank you, Father, for your perfect Son, my brother. So my brother is God's Son, and he's perfect. And in his glory will I see my own. So he's shining with glory. He's perfect. He's God's Son. And so I can thank God for him. And if I do that and thereby see his glory, I'll then see my own glory. So we're thankful for their true nature. We're thankful for their gifts to us. And here is one place where the conventional approach to gratitude dovetails with the Course, because you see a lot of, like I looked at those websites and there's a lot of talk about recording the things that kindnesses people had done for you that you were grateful for. And this is a major focus in the Course's discussions of gratitude as well. But the next one is what probably more than anything else, like blew my mind, which is we can be grateful for their attacks on us. And the reasoning goes like this, and there's probably about half a dozen passages that speak to this, but a couple of them very directly. The reasoning goes like this. When your brother attacks you, he can't really hurt you. He is just calling for help, because by attacking, he's lost touch with the love that is his own happiness and sustenance. And so his attack is a call for help. He's in a state of needing help. Okay. And if you can see that he needs your help, and then realize the appropriate response is to give him the help he's calling for, which at root needs to be based on love and forgiveness, then you have realized that his attack is an opportunity that can bring love into your own mind. And anything that brings love into your mind, you should be grateful for. And so, for instance, just as a to put some flesh on this, favorite old story of mine is this old Zen story, which is, I think, pretty well known, where there's this Zen hermit. He's living in this shack out by himself, out in the wilderness, and a thief comes by to steal from him. And the hermit's there, and he's like, "Hey, unfortunately, I don't have anything to give you." And so the Zen guy strips off his clothes and gives them to this befuddled thief, who runs off confused. And then I guess it was nighttime, and he's there looking up at the moon. And he says, "I wish I could give him this beautiful moon." And that is seeing the actions of the thief as a call for love and responding with love. So what came into the Zen master's mind as a response to the attack was love. Why wouldn't he be grateful then?
Well, I imagine there's a lot of people listening thinking,
Yeah.
I am not a Zen master, and if someone came to rob my place, they would get a lot more than my clothes. And so what are we to do if we're thinking, this just sounds naive at best and a permission slip for abuse at worst?
Well, first of all, I think let's just, for a moment, before we get into all that, let ourselves be inspired. There's a reason that Zen story is being told centuries later. There's a reason we all, at least as course students, are, and I think people around the world, are inspired by Jesus's defenselessness and forgiveness and love in the face of being crucified. There's a reason why there's that great story, not a true story, of course, but so inspiring, in Les Miserables, where Jean Valjean has stolen from the bishop, and he's dragged back by the police. And the bishop says, "Oh, you forgot to take the candlesticks?" Yeah, which was a total fabrication, right? It was a straight theft. And responding to that theft with seeing that Jean Valjean was the one in need. His act was a call for help, and responding with loving help, that changed that character in the book forever and changed his whole trajectory. Everything else that happens in the book comes out of that one act by the bishop. So let's just let ourselves be inspired for a moment before we go into the, hey, what about
the yeah buts?
Yeah, because there's a reason those stories have captivated countless millions across time, right? Because something in us says, it's true, the attacker is calling for help and does need our love. So yeah, there are practical issues.
Yeah, and this is why Jesus's own life story has so inspired us over the centuries. I mean, he really is the ultimate demonstration of this, able to teach only love up to the point of his own death, to be forgiving of the very people who had murdered him and were standing in front of him mocking him as he died. So the guy who's giving us this advice isn't someone who hasn't demonstrated it himself. And so we should take his words very seriously, because he knows of what he speaks. At the same time, as we pause with the appropriate sacredness of this idea, and it's true, you and I were talking last night about just Jesus's approach being so different and so radical, and yet it is the thing that can truly heal our world. One thing
Yeah,
I'm very fond of saying these days is there's only so many people you can deplatform with your cultural canceling. There's only so many prisons that we can build to people who transgress our laws. And there's only so many friends and family members that we can cut off until we realize that the approach that we have taken is not working. And we know it's not working because our world is on fire and our relationships are quite dysfunctional and toxic. So what we're doing, this approach of, well, you're not going to take advantage of me, and if you attack me, I'm going to attack you right back. This isn't working. Okay?
right. That's the
So
slow track.
right.
Like winning them over by soundly defeating them in the court of public opinion or whatever. That's the slow track. Winning them over with love is the fast track.
And ultimately the more effective one, because all that happens when you do the eye for an eye thing is, as Gandhi said, the whole world ends up blind. And so you just escalate the situation with your return attack.
Right.
It's the emotional discipline, the spiritual practice of being able to say, I'm going to love you because I recognize that right now you're the one who's suffering. You are so
Right.
angry, and that anger is hurting you. And how can I be there for you in the face of that? Now, that's amazing.
Yeah. And before we leave this topic and go on to the next category, I just want to mention that, like, if you can imagine that you're the bishop in that story, okay, and the woman that was his helper who lived with him, and his kind of assistant, she was unhappy with his actions in this regard, by the way. Um, she just thought he was too free-handed and generous. But imagine if you were the bishop, you would have cause to be grateful for Jean Valjean's theft. How would you not be grateful that he did that? And then imagine that you're treating other attacks, insults, verbal abuse, whatever, unkindness, with the same essential approach. You can then be grateful in the face of each and every one because you see it as an opportunity to offer love, which makes you happier. And what really captivated me about this idea, which I'd seen in the course but had always kind of brushed over because it is rather inconvenient, what captivated me was that now I could legitimately, reasonably be grateful for not just who my brother essentially is, but for everything he does, the kind, helpful things and the attacking things. I could be grateful for everything he does. And the ramifications of that are, rather profound and sweeping, because so much of our lack of gratitude has to do with the actions of others, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, we do recognize this is a very high bar,
It's
one
a high
which
bar.
we're not saying that we always get right ourselves.
And on the way there, we might, get there rather imperfectly and go too far in
Right.
one
But
direction or another.
that's the benefit of at least knowing where the bar is. So even
Yeah,
if it's a high bar, if you're swinging for that and you fall short, then that's way better than you would have been if you just think that the approach to attack is to escalate the situation by attacking back. So even if you're like, well, I wasn't able to demonstrate unconditional love in that situation, at least you can say I was more loving than I would have been otherwise, and that's progress. And the
yeah,
more incremental progress you make, the closer you're going to get to that bar in the end. And that's all we're doing here anyway, is
yeah,
we're here for our spiritual advancement. We're here to learn how to love. And if we don't get it right, this is the thing that inspires me. If we don't get it right, we're coming right back to do it again. And I don't want to come back again. I want to get it right now.
we're not here to win.
Yeah.
Anyway, we only have like a few minutes left, so we should
Yeah,
pick up the
we're
pace.
not even on your fourth
Yeah, okay.
uh,
So
thing.
quickly, the after God, being grateful for God, ourselves, others, comes our salvation. And there were a lot of different categories that I found under this general heading. First of all, being grateful that God has a plan for everyone's salvation, and the plan is guaranteed to work in the end. Why wouldn't we be grateful that there's going to be one big happy ending? Grateful for the Holy Spirit, for his help, for his guidance. Grateful for Jesus, for being with us and his help and his teaching. Grateful in a few places, the Course says, for the progress we've made. Whenever we find we've made some bit of progress, we should be consciously grateful for that, not in an egotistical way, but in a healthy way. Grateful to do our workbook practice. That came up in several workbook lessons, because that workbook practice benefits us and moves us along. And also grateful just for all the specific blessings that show up in our lives that ultimately come from God. Now, I'm not saying that everything that we consider a blessing in our lives is from God, but I think that for those on the spiritual path, we know that certain things come almost like with little labels attached to them. They come in a certain way with a certain feeling, and you just have a strong sense this was a gift from above.
The label is from God.
Yeah. Yeah. To so-and-so, love God. So this is this overall approach to gratitude that was in those many quotes. And what I love about it, like I said earlier, is it does have room for specific things. The gifts we gave, the gifts given to us, sitting down and doing our practice, having instances of guidance or things from the Holy Spirit show up in our lives. But it's rooted in the nature of reality itself, beyond time and space, beyond change, beyond this world. That's the roots of this view, so that in the end, we're grateful for the big things that never change. And that kind of gratitude can't help but be far more meaningful, infinitely more meaningful, and therefore far more emotionally sustaining.
Yeah, it's interesting, the research that I did on conventional gratitude for the workshop that we did yesterday. The idea was that gratitude makes us happier because the positive thinking that it inspires crowds out the negative thinking. And yet, even if in that kind of gratitude, what is generating those positive thoughts is around fleeting and transient things, then we're still on ground that is shaky, because
Yeah,
our connection will always be tied to things that are eternal.
yeah,
Um, and here we have this beautiful list of things that will never leave us. God will never leave us. Our true nature will never leave us. We're indebted to our brother. We're connected to them in the sonship. And we're all going to get there in the end. What a beautiful picture of what to really be grateful for in life. And so instead of standing around our Thanksgiving tables being grateful that we have all this food, which does set us up for that comparison because others don't, there are others who don't.
right.
We can be grateful for the things that no matter who we are or where we live, we all share this. We all have this in common. And
Yeah,
that's just so inspiring, and just a heart melting idea that the Course has given us.
it is. And I know that we don't have much time left. We need to talk about the practice of gratitude in the Course.
Yeah, I was
But
wondering if you were going to get to that, because we don't have a ton of time, so you have to.
okay, so let me just barrel through all that, okay? And then we can talk some before we, because it
Oh,
won't take
Lord.
too long.
Okay.
So first of all, before we talk about the practice of it, I think the main thing that got me about that whole picture was it meant that what the Course calls the song of thanks, or the song of gratitude, or the song of thankfulness, there's a lot of different references to this in the Course, that can become essentially our worldview, our response to everything. He talks in lesson 195 about us having this view in which we're badgered ceaselessly and pushed about without thought or care. That tends to be the typical human worldview, right? We're this lonely self and we're being pushed around by uncaring and hostile forces. that whole worldview can be replaced by the song of thanks. Our life can become a song of thanks. And that just seems truly profound to me.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about yesterday is that that's going on in us anyway. The Course talks about how underneath these bodies, these illusory forms, these personalities, there is that song of thanks to God happening in us right now.
Yeah.
And the praying without ceasing is happening right now. The holiness that's in us that just blesses is in us now. And so all we have to do, it's not like we have to find how to do this, it's that we have to get our ego out of the way so that what's naturally there can express itself.
Yeah.
We're already grateful. We just need to get rid of our unforgiveness and grievances and anger, etc., so that it can come out.
Yeah. And I'm very conscious of how little time we have. And I do want to talk about the practice because the Course, because the Course, I think was absolutely way ahead of its time in offering a series of gratitude practices. So I'll just go through those. One is, and they add up to really a day of gratitude. So in lesson 340, we begin the day by saying, Father, I thank you for today and for the freedom I am certain it will bring. So we're thanking God for the progress we're going to make for the day ahead, and we're doing that ahead of time. That's one practice. Lesson 123 has another morning practice in which we actually spend 15 minutes thanking God for the kinds of things we've been talking about. That's really the heftiest, by far, gratitude practice in the Course. And then a couple of lessons talk about an hourly gratitude practice. 153 has us pause on the hour for a couple minutes or so and thank God for all the gifts he gave us in the hour gone by. And I like to do that and just I like to add on a such as. So I'll thank God for all the gifts he gave in the hour gone by, and then say such as, and then think of something I feel that was a gift from him in that hour. Lesson 232 has us thank God each hour for the simple fact that he's never left us. He's remained with us, and he'll always be there to hear our call to him. And then finally, in the manual, section 29, after a day of asking for guidance whenever we can, we thank the Holy Spirit for his guidance at night. And I found it to be, and we've both done this, a useful practice to basically at the very, very end of the day, right before your head hits the pillow, to just thank God for the things, instances of guidance, as well as other things that you feel like were gifts from him over the course of the day. And it's surprising and gratifying to see just how many of those things come to mind.
Yeah, that is a wonderful practice to kind of lay on your pillow, nose to nose, and talk about the things that you are grateful for that happened in the day. And again, not that you can't be grateful for your coffee; it's that we're just being asked to be rooted in something much deeper.
The coffee again.
The coffee, yeah, I know it's an addiction. Robert, anything else? We are at the top of the hour. Thank you, first of all, for doing this compilation of the 325 instances of gratitude and thanks in the Course and pulling out these main themes. And what a beautiful picture he has given us. And
there's so much more to it.
Mm-hmm.
The picture's way bigger than we could ever cover. Excuse me. Right now. But what I'm left with is thinking like this can be the basis for a new approach, a new response to life. I feel like in the last 50, 60 years, psychological research has caught up to some degree with the Course, but I feel that in its fundamental view of what to be grateful for, it's still way, way ahead of us.
Well, yeah, because when you hear count your blessings, for example, who is saying I'm grateful for the blessing of the God's creation of me, God's love of me, that God hasn't abandoned me. These are not typically the blessings that we count, but they could.
Or my brother's attacks on me.
My brother's attacks on me. I know.
Right.
Conveniently left that one out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Robert, thank you once again.
Thank
And
you.
we're now past the hour, so we should probably break here. But thank you all for joining us live. If you want to listen live to a future broadcast of Exploring A Course in Miracles, you're welcome to visit circleofa.org/events. And we will see you next time. Bye for now.